What's really at the core of the exhibition is an invitation to think about history and how history is constructed and how history is often also determined by a particular time, by a particular point of view. And now, we often have to revise history.
What's interesting about other primary structures is that it bridges our past meaning the past of the 1960s with the future and how we look forward. I mean, one of the things is that we couldn't really look and address contemporary art now unless we sort of looked back and see the kind of achievements that the museum made in the late 1950s through the 60s.
Primary Structures took place in 1966, was organized by Kinister McShine, and it was the first exhibition that brought together artwork that was later then brought together as a movement called minimal art, mostly with artists from the UK and from the US. And it's been arguably the most important exhibition of the 1960s, not only at the Jewish Museum, but in any New York or US institution for that matter. What would it mean if I don't write about an exhibition, historical exhibition, and not lecture about it, but actually make a show about another show? And what kind of different ways can there be to make shows about other shows? You can make a remake, you can make a sequel, if you will, looking at the history of a particular exhibition and how that has inspired younger contemporary artists working now. Or in this case, it's almost sort of like a spin-off where there's additional material or side characters that are being introduced and now they have their own sitcom, if you will. Other means basically two different things. On the one hand, other just means additional, more. The other also refers to the term other in terms of cultural studies and post-colonial discourse. It's quite interesting that the artists that from Latin America, Asia, Middle East or Eastern Europe usually do not like to be labeled minimal art. For most of them, the term minimal art is something that the West has created and they don't necessarily feel it represents what they are doing. But then you have something like the Asians, Korean artists or Japanese artists whose work is similarly reduced but has much more to do with Zen philosophy, where it's very much about the essence of form or thinking about materiality and bringing out the characteristics of certain materials. One of the challenges that I was confronted with when curating other primary structures was, of course, the fact that the original show was taking place in the entire building, and for other primary structures, we are actually only using one floor. Thinking about it, I realized that it would be interesting to cut the show in half and present works that were made between 1960 and 1966, 66 being the year when Primary Structures was staged, and in the second part have works between 1966 and 1970. In order for the visitor to get an understanding of the original show, I included Kinister McShine's wall text, as well as a list of original artists just across my wall text and the list of artists who are going to be in other primary structures. Throughout the exhibition, we have installed large super graphics. And on those super graphics, you see installation shots of the original show in 1966. And in front of many of those super graphics, I installed works of the artists that are now in other primary structures, as if these works were actually included in the original show. One of the highlights of the exhibition can be found in the last gallery, which is the Jewish Museum as a scale model, how it looked in 1966, including an entire recreation of primary structures with small miniature artworks. As a result of the post-colonial situation that we went through and globalization, we all of a sudden, really have to open up and look at art that's been made in other places of the world, particularly in a radical moment like the 60s that saw so many radical art movements come up.
The museum was looked at as a place where, from the point of view of Jews being the most progressive thinkers, the most progressive doers, and that they were intellectual but looking towards the future.
I would see that the Jewish Museum would always be and continues to be on the forefront of the latest developments in contemporary art, just as a form of radical thinking. And minimal art was, as radical as you could get at that point.